and welcome viewers. I'm Pia and you're watching Gulf Today on NewsX World, and here are the headlines this hour. The Israeli army has released a video claiming to show the strike that killed Hezbollah's top military commander in the southern suburb of Beirut, despite a US-brokered truce a year ago. The strike, the first on the outskirts of the Lebanese capital in months, targeted Iran-backed Hezbollah's acting chief of staff Ali Tabatabai. The military has, of course, highlighted these visuals. Sudan's army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has called the latest truce proposal sent by US envoy Masad Boulos on behalf of a group of mediators the worst yet and unacceptable to his government. This comes after US President Donald Trump announced that he will be looking into the situation in the civil war-torn country at Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's request. At least 3 people have been killed in what is being described as a suicide bombing in Pakistan's Peshawar. The target of the attack was the Pakistani paramilitary force headquarters in the city. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has hailed the tremendous progress made in talks with his Ukrainian counterparts in Geneva, as the US and Ukraine have put forward an updated proposal for peace between Ukraine and Russia. Russian forces staged a massive drone attack on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, killing 4 people and injuring several others. Rescue efforts for people trapped in the debris is underway. French President Emmanuel Macron met with his counterpart Brice Oligui Nguema from Gabon in Libreville. The two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a reinvented partnership following bilateral talks. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has stated that she's open to talks with China amidst a rapidly escalating diplomatic row between the two countries over her remarks on Taiwan. More than 11,000 people in 7 Malaysian states have been affected by flooding caused by torrential rain. A report from the National Disaster Management Agency shows that 3,839 families have been affected by flooding. Well, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. In recent reports, oil prices have steadied after falling 3% last week as investors weighed the potential impact of a US rate cut against the prospect of a Russia-Ukraine peace deal that could ease sanctions on Russian oil. Brent crude has remained at $62.56 per barrel, while West Texas Intermediate dipped slightly to $58.04 per barrel. US President Donald Trump's push for a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine has raised expectations of more Russian oil hitting global markets. If successful, the deal could roll back sanctions, potentially flooding the market with additional Russian supply. This prospect has overshadowed the near-term impact of recent US sanctions on Russian firms, which have stranded nearly 48 million barrels of crude. For Gulf oil producers, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Kuwait, the return of Russian oil could intensify price competition, particularly as these nations aim to stabilize prices amid ongoing market volatility. The Gulf is already grappling with a 17% drop in crude prices this year, and any increase in Russian exports could further strain their revenue projections. Meanwhile, growing expectations of a US interest rate cut in December following comments from Federal Reserve officials could help lift global market sentiment, providing some support to the oil prices. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Glenn Grant, former advisor to the Defense Minister of Ukraine. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. There have been talks that we've seen in Geneva which have been described as rather productive. A fresh proposal is now in the works with inputs taken in from the Ukrainian side as well. The original draft saw a lot of leniency being given to the Russian side, with Ukraine expected to make concessions with regards to its NATO ambitions and its territory as well. Could we see this sort of being eased out in the fresh draft that is being prepared?
No, I don't believe so. And I think this is all at the moment a US game to try and help Russia. But Russia has not said anything that gives the slightest hint that they're willing to stop the fighting, and without some sort of agreement between Russia and Ukraine, I don't think it really matters what America does. At the moment, America is trying to bully Ukraine into giving up, but Ukraine is not going to do so.
Indeed, and we've also seen that the European allies earlier highlight that they were not a part of the original plan that was drafted. They put forth a counter proposal, including a NATO-style security guarantee from the United States for Ukraine if it is attacked. Would America bow down to this pressure that Ukraine's European allies are exerting, or not?
I don't think so. I mean, Trump's already said clearly that he doesn't see any chance of troops on the ground in Ukraine from America, although he seems quite happy to talk about troops on the ground in Colombia and Venezuela. I mean, these people are all working in separate strands on separate levels. But the bottom line is Russia invaded Ukraine and wants to keep going. Ukraine has to keep going and fighting if Russia is fighting. So until we hear something from Putin, I think, this is just a paper exercise.
Indeed. And we're also, in fact, now seeing oil prices steadying. They've fallen 3% last week. But there is, of course, a lot of murmur going on that Russian oil and could once again be competing with the Gulf states in the aftermath of a potential deal that is still in the works. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, if Putin decides that he's going to stop the war, then of course oil is back on the table, this really, I suppose, depends upon how much damage Ukraine has done to the Russian oil industry. So there's two things there. One, whether Russia is capable of actually increasing its oil out into the world, and two, whether Ukraine will actually let them. I think there's a lot more to play for than just the idea about oil coming out.
Indeed. And speaking of the reactions that we've seen so far, from the Americans, of course, Donald Trump had earlier stated that Ukraine is not grateful enough, after which, of course, we've seen a very lengthy statement from President Zelensky expressing his deep gratitude to the U.S. administration and Trump in particular. What do you make of the sort of posture that Trump is trying to adopt at the moment?
To be honest, I'm disgusted with it, because Trump's America has done hardly anything to support Ukraine compared to what they have done with Afghanistan and Iraq in the past. So we're talking small, and compared to what they did with Russia in the Second World War, and this is no different time to that. So really, Trump is just playing his Russia card. I support Russia is what Trump is saying, not I support Ukraine.
And indeed, another part of the leaked draft had shown that sanctions that have been imposed on Russia would be examined on a case-by-case basis. That's not all. It's also left the door open for Russia to be reinducted into the augmented group of 8 nations. What does this really say about the Trump administration's approach?
Well, it says that they're full of lies. That's one thing. I mean, Trump talked about the sanctions, and that he talked about that just to keep people happy. But it was quite clear to me, anyway, that he never had any idea of wanting to put sanctions on if he didn't have to. So this is a good opportunity for him to roll back on sanctions. Putin needs the sanctions off because his oil industry depends upon parts and support to keep it going from abroad to keep it going. These sanctions are bearing down on him. Trump does not like that because it harms his friend Putin. So watch this space for some changes coming to try and reduce those sanctions and to blame Ukraine at the same time.
All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you for taking our time, of course, sharing your analysis with us on NewsX World. On that note, viewers, we're shifting our focus away from the war in Europe towards what's happening in the Middle East. A senior Hamas delegation has met Egypt's intelligence chief in Cairo to discuss the ceasefire agreement and the situation in Gaza, as both Israel and Hamas continue to trade accusations of violating the truce. Hamas has stated that it remains committed to the first phase of the ceasefire, but has accused Israel of ongoing breaches that threaten the agreement. The group has called for a clear mechanism under mediator supervision to document and stop any sort of violations. The talks also focused on the fate of Hamas in Rafah, especially those who are trapped in tunnels where communication has been lost. Mediators have been trying to address the situation of those who are trapped in the tunnel networks in Israeli-controlled areas in Gaza. Israel says that its military has in fact killed 5 senior Hamas members after a fighter entered its territory to attack soldiers. With us on the broadcast is Sacha Masta, political commentator, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Hamas once again pinpointing its fingers towards Israel, accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire agreement, the first phase of which we're yet to see the completion of, because the bodies of all of the hostages have not yet been released. The remains of the deceased hostages have not been returned in their entirety. What do you make of this meeting that has taken place, and also what does this really speak of as far as efforts to commence the second phase are concerned?
So first of all, thanks for having me back. We saw Hamas's delegation in Cairo is nothing more than just another show put on by Hamas to make it look like they're serious in negotiations, but all they're negotiating is their own survival. Phase 2 is in fact their end in Gaza. It's their disarmament and leaving the Gaza Strip. So when we saw that Hamas began negotiating phase 2, it doesn't really make sense to somebody who's read and understood the Trump plan. So all this can be understood as Hamas trying to stage their own political survival and hope that the international pressure that had been placed on them will eventually end, as they've been able to prolong the negotiations and they've been able to prolong phase 1 for so long. So we hope that the international pressure will increase and that Hamas will no longer be able to continue and stretch these negotiations, because their time in Gaza is over. Phase 2 requires their disarmament, and one way or another this must happen. And so I wouldn't look into this negotiation meeting in Cairo as anything more than a staged show like has been going on for the past 2 weeks, when they've refused to release hostages and had been testing the limits of this ceasefire. And we'll have to see in the next few days what's going to happen with the ISF, because that's going to determine the future of Hamas in Gaza, and whether Hamas will be disarmed by an international coalition or whether Israel have to be the one to do it.
Indeed, I'd like to digress a little bit over here and speak about Hezbollah. We've recently seen a strike. It's not been confirmed yet, but there are reports circulating that Haytham Ali Tabatabai, who's the de facto leader of the Hezbollah forces that are trying to regroup in Lebanon, has now been killed in this fresh strike in southern Beirut. What were Israel's motivations to carry out this attack? What sort of messaging is Israel trying to send, not just to Hezbollah, but to the Lebanese government as well?
The message to the region, in fact, is clear, that Israel won't allow terrorists that openly threaten to destroy the state of Israel, won't allow them to exist and to build up their ammunition and build up their terror army to threaten and attack Israel. The days of Israel just turning a blind eye to infractions in agreements are over. That's a clear message. Another message that should be understood by Lebanon is that if the Lebanese government has already failed in disarming Hezbollah, then Israel won't stand by and wait for a miracle. Israel will have to take their security into their own hands, and the targeted elimination yesterday was a strong sign of what's to come. If the Lebanese army is not able to disarm Hezbollah, Israel will have to do it, and Israel won't be waiting around. it's a very, very significant elimination as well, because this chief of staff of Hezbollah was also the man in charge of allocating Iranian funds and deciding how the terrorist army will operate. So now that he's eliminated, there's been a successful elimination, it's clear that Israel wants to also intervene and cut off Hezbollah from Iran, and that's what they're trying to do as well.
Indeed, sir. Requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates, this time from Iraq. Iraqi Kurdish security forces have opened fire on a drone as it approached the Khormor gas field in the Kurdistan region of the country. Now, according to security sources, they have informed that the field, which is one of Iraq's largest gas reserves, was not damaged in this particular incident. The drone, of course, had triggered air defenses, prompting a response from security forces to prevent it from reaching the site. It remains unclear as of now whether the drone was successfully shot down. Sirens were, of course, activated at the field and employees were moved to secure areas as a precaution. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Sasha Mashta. Interesting development. Why do you think the Khormor gas field was targeted? Was its significant role and the significant role it plays in Iraq's energy infrastructure one of the key reasons?
So yes, this oil field is critical for Iraq's actually both energy and economy. This is probably the most important field and sector in both the Iraqi economy, but also in many Gulf nations that totally depend on their oil fields for their economy. The problem in Iraq is that unlike countries like the Emirates or Saudi Arabia, they don't fully have control of their resources because they are also a country that's occupied by Iranian militias that just stir conflict and seek to export the Islamic Revolution all around both, of course, the Middle East and the world, but that's why they're targeting such a critical infrastructure. And Iraqi leadership is significantly weak, as militias are also dominating their country, not to the extent of Lebanon, but in a similar manner where all these militias are really acting against the interests of the people and the state. So we're going to have to see more on these developments, understand who exactly launched this drone and what the intentions are. But for me, it's clear that it's to stir up conflict and attack the most important infrastructure and economic infrastructure of Iraq.
Indeed. With that, I'd like to thank you, sir, for taking out time, of course, sharing your perspective and analysis with us. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus to more developments. We're now learning that US President Donald Trump has announced that he will designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization, citing the group's role in destabilizing the Middle East and radicalizing young Muslims. Trump has stated that the action will be carried out in the strongest and most powerful terms, with final documents currently being prepared. This decision comes days after an expose detailing the Brotherhood's activities and reflects long-standing concerns within the Trump administration. Founded nearly a century ago in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood now has chapters and affiliated movements around the world. Shifting focus to more developments coming in, this time from Dubai. Dubai has approved its largest budget cycle in history for the next 3 years. That is for the period of 2026 to 2028. The 3-year budget has formalized total expenditures at about 302.7 billion UAE dirhams and total revenues at about 329.2 billion UAE dirhams. Now, the 2026 plan reportedly includes a general reserve of 5 billion dirhams to support long-term financial stability. Moreover, nearly half of the 2026 expenditure will be directed towards infrastructure, including roads, bridges, parks, and public transport. Now, according to the Dubai Crown Prince, the budget supports the Emirates' strategic goals, including the target of doubling GDP and positioning Dubai amongst the world's top urban economies. Officials also note that the new financial budget cycle balances ambitious growth along with economic stability through medium-term financial planning. On that note, viewers, it's a wrap on Gulf Today. We will continue to track all these updates very, very closely, but due to paucity of time, we are dipping into a quick short break. Stay tuned on NewsX World.